Welcome to Hope Natural Health, the podcast inspiring you to be your best version. Join me, your host, Dr. Erin, naturopathic doctor, dog mom, cancer survivor, and girl boss weekly as we discuss all things health, hormones, and happiness with a little side of this thing called life. Welcome back to the podcast. This week, I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why you might be gaining weight. So who out there has a few extra pounds on them that you might have called the quarantine 15, or you might be still doing all the things that you were doing and you're still gaining weight and you're not trying to gain weight, you're actually trying to lose weight. So in this week's episode, I'll tell you 3 reasons why this might be happening. The first one is our metabolism is just not working right. So for good metabolism, we need good mitochondrial function. Now, what in the heck is a mitochondria? Well, our mitochondria are energy or powerhouse cells in our body. We need mitochondria for ATP, which is our energy. So if we don't have good mitochondrial function, we're not going to have good metabolism. And if you don't have good metabolism, you might also not be eating enough. So if we're eating in a calorie deficit, this is a huge problem that I see in weight gain with women. And you might think that I am going to sound a little bit crazy when I talk about this next part of the nutrition, but we need to eat more. Oftentimes women come into my office and they're struggling to lose weight, and we go through a diet recall and they're maybe eating twice a day, or they're eating more than that, but very, very minimal. They're maybe getting 1,200 calories in, and they're working out 5 to 6 days a week, heavy, intense exercise, and they're gaining weight. Well, I know why. It's because they're not eating enough based on their metabolic demands. So if we are under eating based on this, our body is essentially starving itself, and we're going to store everything that we take in as far as food goes and store it as fat. We're not going to use it as energy. We're not going to use it to burn off, etc. So we have to make sure that we're getting enough calories in based on our metabolic demand. But we also have to go back to the origination of the metabolism and look at that mitochondrial function. A good test for this is CoQ10. I run CoQ10 all the time to see how our mitochondrial function is, because CoQ10 is a big, big helper for our mitochondria. And we also have to remember too, as we age, our metabolism likes to slow down. So who here was able to eat whatever they wanted in their 20s and didn't have to worry about gaining a pound? I know I was one of them. And then quickly in my 30s and even 40s, that caught up to me quickly, and I started gaining weight. Even though I was doing every single thing that I was doing before, my metabolism was just slowing down. And as women, we aren't tiny men. Like, we have a different composition. We have different metabolic makeup than men. So weight loss for women is very, very, very harder than men to lose that weight. So we have to take into our hormones at play, our adrenals, our thyroid. So you can go back to episode 4 and talk about that, which is the next reason why you might be gaining weight, is your thyroid. So if you don't know anything about your thyroid, stop right here, go back to episode 4 and listen about the thyroid. I explain it in detail, signs and symptoms of hypothyroid versus hyperthyroid. And if your thyroid isn't working optimally, likely sluggish or underactive, which is the most common, then we're going to be gaining some weight and we're not even trying. And this is a huge red flag and a light bulb that goes off when patients come to me and they say, I am still exercising the same amount, I'm still eating the same amount, and I'm gaining weight. Also, stress plays a huge role in our thyroid. So as I've mentioned multiple times in this podcast, stress can have a doozy on our overall health, and it affects our thyroid, therefore it affects our weight, etc. Or we might be stressed and we tend to stress eat, and we're taking in those bad calories that we shouldn't be eating, but it makes us feel good. We've all been there. Me too. We sometimes splurge. And then lastly would be about insulin resistance. So insulin is a hormone that is produced by our pancreas. And what happens is when we eat food, the glucose that we get from our food signals our pancreas to release the insulin. And then insulin comes up and gobbles glucose and brings it into our cells for energy. Sometimes our cells become desensitized to this insulin and glucose. And when that happens, it's kind of like think about if you lived in New York City with a whole bunch of lights and sirens and all of that. Like eventually you just tune that out. Like you don't hear it anymore. It's just not something that, you tune into. Same thing in our cells. Like our cells can tune out to insulin and we don't respond to that glucose that we just ate and to bring it into our cells for energy. So if we have that desensitization, then insulin's going to climb and glucose is going to climb. And then we're not bringing that food or the glucose into our cells for energy. We're storing it as fat. So that can contribute to some weight gain. And insulin resistance or higher insulin is common as we age, is common in perimenopause, menopause. It's also common in a condition called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which we'll talk about in a further episode. And it's actually something that I see quite often is this insulin resistance going on. So that is a huge indicator of gaining weight. Now, what can you do if you have something like this going on? Well, I'm a huge believer in testing, not guessing. So that's where seeing a functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, someone in this alternative medicine route will help you get to that diagnosis and help you get that root cause as to what's going on. Because if you are still doing all of the things, you're eating right, you're exercising, and everything is same as it was 6 months ago and you're gaining weight, something's not right metabolically going on. And that's where lab testing can be super helpful. And those are 3 reasons that I commonly see. Sometimes it could be hormone imbalance. Oftentimes it is too. So remember in episode 3 when I was talking about, or episode 4, the thyroid and talking about the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and how our body acts as a whole and the domino effect. Like if something's off, then likely something else is going to be off, etc. It's just this domino game that's going on in our body. So again, 3 reasons why you might be gaining weight. 1, we have poor metabolism. We might have poor metabolism due to poor mitochondrial function, or we're eating in a caloric deficit. And 2 would be our thyroid is not working properly, which is very common. So go back to episode 4, learn about the thyroid. And then the last reason would be possibly insulin resistance. Now, all of these things could be happening together. It's just, again, that's why it's important to look at the whole body and figure out what's going on. So this was a short, sweet episode, but it's a very hot topic that I hear in the office, and I wanted to share it here with you today. So stay tuned. Next week, we will have a special guest, one of my favorite dietitians, talking about nutrition and diets and why diets are how we both really don't like that word and why. So you don't want to miss this episode. And like always, I would appreciate a review if you got anything out of this podcast, and you can screenshot this episode and share it to the world. We'll see you next week.